Hi, my name is Jocelyn, and welcome to my podcast. This is the Positivity in Pregnancy and Motherhood podcast, where I encourage you to find positivity during pregnancy and also in motherhood. Lately, I have been focusing on pregnancy because I was pregnant with my 5th child. And yes, you heard right, I said was. Surprisingly, he came almost 3 weeks early. But both baby and I are doing well, and I've debated on what to do a podcast on. I didn't know if I was ready to share the birth story, but nothing else was coming to mind that I was really anxious to do a podcast on. I have so many ideas now that I've had him, but I kind of need to share the birth story first. So today you get to hear the birth story of my 5th baby and kind of a little bit of my journey with pregnancy, and how I have kind of progressed over the years as I've learned and strived to understand birth a little better, understand my body better, and how it all works. So, thank you for joining, and let's jump into today's episode. Hi, I'm Jocelyn, host of the Positive in Pregnancy and Motherhood podcast. I help pregnant women and mothers to find positivity in their season of life through changing their thoughts to work for them and not against them. I help mothers find the small, doable steps in thought and action without making drastic changes to their everyday mom life, and I can help you. Thanks for joining. So I imagine that you've had a mental list before. Like you probably had a list of things that you hoped for in a spouse. Maybe you wanted him to be the tall, dark, and handsome. Maybe you hoped that he would be God-fearing, or that he liked your style of music. I kind of had a similar list when it came to the birth that I wanted. I wanted an unmedicated birth this time. I wanted to go all natural. I wanted to labor in the water. I wanted to preferably labor during the day and not have to go through the contractions at night. And so on and so forth. Those are a few of the things I really wanted when it came to this 5th birth. And I'm actually not going to talk about the progression a whole lot in this. I will probably in another episode, but I'll just give a brief one. I went from having an emergency C-section with my first baby, epidurals for babies 2 and 3, and then babies 4 and 5 were unmedicated and all natural. 4 was a little traumatic, and we're going to talk about 5 right now. So I actually had written this down, and I'm going to share what I had written because it's way better written, and then I don't forget things. So last Tuesday, which wasn't last Tuesday, but when I wrote it, it was last Tuesday. When I was at the midwife's clinic for a normal appointment, my stomach was only measuring at 33 centimeters. It should have been measuring closer to 37. The midwife I met with that day was concerned, and she really felt that I should do an ultrasound, but I didn't want to do an ultrasound. My baby's heart rate was fine, he seemed to be moving fine, and I would just have this feeling that an ultrasound would lead to intervention that I didn't want. She asked if I had had contractions, and I told her that I hadn't really, but that he would stretch uncomfortably on occasion. I talked with my husband, and I felt good about waiting through the weekend and then measuring my stomach again. And if I didn't measure bigger, I would get the ultrasound. I tried my best to not worry, to go on with life, and tried not to be overly concerned about measuring small. Now, that's what most women want, right? You want to measure small and not be overly big, but it does get concerning when you're like 5 centimeters smaller than you're supposed to be. So I tried really hard not to worry about that. All right, I almost cut this part out of telling you guys, but I decided I'm going to tell you. That Wednesday, I had 2 large bowel movements. I never have 2 large bowel movements in a day. I remember hearing that a change in bowels can mean that things are close to baby coming, but I didn't think I was close. I was still like 3 weeks away. and all my girls came at or around the due date. I figured my body just might be preparing for 3 weeks. That Thursday, things were fine, and I went about my day as normal. In the evening, I felt some contractions, but figured they were just Braxton Hicks. Like I've mentioned many times, I was still 2 to 3 weeks out from my due date, and I knew that Braxton Hicks could happen for a few weeks prior to having a baby. That Friday morning, I woke up, and I was going about getting breakfast made for everyone when I felt some fluid. I didn't think it was pee. It wet my pants, and I thought, that's weird. I just decided to put a pad on and see what would happen. Sure enough, not too long later, I felt another gush, and I had to change pants again. I decided to tell my husband that I was leaking fluids. He told me that I needed to tell my doula. I just felt all the emotions at this time. Scared, nervous, excited, terrified, not ready. I was frightened, I was scared, overwhelmed by the unknown, and nervous. I knew that if my water really had broke, that a baby would be born one way or another within 24 hours, and I didn't know if I was ready. I had birthed my 4th baby all natural and unmedicated, but it was very traumatic, and I had flashbacks and sincerely wondered if I could do it. I had to take a moment or 2 or 3 or 4 and cry out some big emotions. One of my friends who I had recently talked to about her birth mentioned that she had asked her husband for a blessing when she was in labor, and that seemed like a great idea. I really needed divine help mentally and physically. I asked my husband for a blessing. It gave some of the best comfort, and really special things were told me in the prayer. One of them that I feel to share, that I held on to that whole day, was that this birth would go smoothly and safe. I cried through the whole prayer, but felt very comforted and knew that it was time to prepare to have a baby. I held on to those words, smooth and safe, all day long. So in my religion, we believe that men hold a power called a priesthood, and they can give blessings. And it's basically a prayer specifically given to the person who is asking for it. So that's kind of what he did for me. So continuing on with the story. I had no hospital bag packed or anything. I hadn't even put together my paper of affirmations that I wanted to have on hand. I had wanted a home birth, but my state law said I couldn't do that, which is a whole another story that I've mentioned on this podcast before. I'll link it in the show notes. But I started puttering around and working on those things. I hadn't really been having hardly any contractions for like an hour or more after losing the first drop of fluid, and I started to pray that labor could start. I really didn't want to have the contractions all night. For some reason, having a baby in the 6 p.m. hour had always sounded good on my mind. It was one of those other things on my list. I knew, though, that labor is unpredictable, and planning on these things, or even really hoping for them, was setting me up for mental failure and likely disappointment. So I hoped for them, but also had to be realistic that I likely wouldn't get much of what I wanted off my list. The fluids had started leaking around 8:45 in the morning, and the contractions were so sporadic and very limited for a couple hours. I started praying that things could pick up. I had read or heard that nipple stimulation can help with contractions, so I went to the bathroom and just rubbed them with my clothes on in hopes that it would help things progress. It wasn't much later that I had a contraction. They seemed really sporadic, and I was annoying myself, wondering how far apart they were. Finally, around noon, I decided to start timing them on a contraction timer app. I felt this would give me peace of mind if things were progressing or not, so I started timing them. They ranged from 5 to 18 minutes apart for the next little while. Then I had a cluster of like 10 that were all under 7 minutes apart. I had told this to my doula. She typically will come labor at home with her mamas, but I only wanted her to help me labor in the hospital, so we were trying to stay in touch. I found that I preferred being alone in my bathroom, leaning on my birthing ball as the contractions hit. I would focus on breathing in for 4 and out for 6 during the contractions, and I would remind myself that I could do anything for a minute. They were getting more intense, though. I turned on my Mormon Tabernacle Choir channel, which is the choir that is part of my church, and I love listening to them. Anyways, I listened to them as I went through contractions. I kept looking longingly at the big tub in my bathroom. I really wanted to get in the water to see if that would help relieve the intensity of the contractions. But I knew if I got in that tub at home, that it would be really hard to get me out of the tub. My husband didn't want me to get in the tub either. He was getting anxious to leave and to get to the hospital. It might have been the fact that a box I had ordered of home birth supplies had showed up, just in case, and he was not at all wanting to deliver a baby at home by himself. On a side note, I didn't tell him that I was ordering this box, but it was kind of my, mental thought, if you're prepared, you shall not fear, right? If the baby comes fast, I wanted to have a few things at home to be prepared for. Anyway, thankfully, my husband had his mom on her way to grab the kids, and when they left, I decided I was hungry. I wanted to eat something before going to the hospital. Also partly because I knew at the hospital, they don't like you to eat. I cut up a green apple, grabbed my all-natural Adams peanut butter out of the fridge, and started eating my apple with peanut butter. I asked my doula how far apart we should wait for the contractions to get before we started heading to the hospital. She told me that when the contractions were 3 minutes apart. Well, it seemed the apple and peanut butter was doing its job. I had a few right in a row that were under 3 minutes that were getting really hard to breathe through, and my husband was very antsy to leave. We decided to leave after I'd finished my apple and peanut butter, and I told him that I needed him to drive normal. I knew that if he drove crazy or extra fast, it would stress me out even more, and I didn't want that. I thought I was still a ways away from delivering. We left our house around 5:17 p.m. I let my doula know, put my ball in the van, and prepared for the drive. I was really looking forward to getting into the tub at the hospital. I let my doula know, and we started on the way. The car ride was all right until the moments that I was having a contraction, and it was bumpy. Then it was terrible. I had taken the ball to lean on, but found that listening to my birthing tracks in the back seat was the best thing. We got there around 5:31, and after having a contraction in the parking lot, we headed to the doors. My doula had called the hospital to tell them that I was coming, and they were waiting for me by the door with a wheelchair, which was so nice. They wheeled me up, and I breathed through a couple more contractions as I got undressed. Marie, she was actually the midwife that I had wanted to deliver me, was there and wanted to check me. It was important for me not to know how far I was dilated. I didn't want to get discouraged. When I had gone to the hospital with baby 4, she told me that I was only dilated to a 4, and I got really discouraged and had a mental breakdown. So I just didn't want to know. I know most people want to know, but I didn't. I knew it would wreak mental havoc on me. She checked me, and I did ask if it was more than a 5, and she said yes. I probably shouldn't have done that, but it was encouraging at that point to know that I was farther than a 5. She mentioned that she thought I was close. I wanted water. I really wanted to have these contractions in water. I wanted to be in the water. They started getting the tub filled up because at this hospital, they did allow you to labor in water. You just were supposed to get out before you had your baby. At this point, the contractions were getting really tough to breathe through. My doula had gotten there, and I had a contraction that felt way longer than a minute. I began to waver. I told her I didn't think I could do it. She reminded me that I could, and that I needed to breathe low and deep. She was right by me, whispering nice and encouraging things in my ear. It was so incredibly tense there at the end. I had a slight reprieve between a contraction, and Marie had asked if I felt like pushing on the last one. I had sort of felt the urge, but not super strong, and then the next one hit, and I knew I needed to push. It was so intense. The bed was propped up, and I was on my hands and knees. I really wanted to scream high-pitched at the top of my lungs, but my amazing doula kept reminding me to keep my voice low and down. It helps your body to open better if the moans are low. I did my best and knew it helped when I did. My doula was such an amazing support in getting me through the ring of fire. It was very intense. There were women all around me. My husband was somewhere in there too, and I felt baby boy moving down. Before I knew it, I had pushed him out. I was almost in shock that I had done it. They handed him to me and I sat back. It was over. I had done it. I was so happy and relieved. No medical intervention, no epidural, no IV, no medication, and I was holding my baby. I soon also found out that there was no tearing. It was such a fast delivery. We had gotten to the hospital at 5:31 p.m. and had delivered him at 6:23. I was so grateful I didn't have to labor very long in the hospital, but I was sad I never got to use the tub, but I had done it. We were able to go home the next evening. My husband took the longer route home, the more scenic way, and I'm glad he did. The fields were green, the new baby cows were by the moms in the field, and it was perfect weather. We drove by where Brooke was buried, and I just couldn't keep from crying. How much I wanted to share with her that we had another son, and to tell her about the experience. Brooke is my husband's sister, my sister-in-law, who passed away from stage 4 breast cancer. I've talked about her on this podcast before, as well. I really wanted to share with her the experience, though. But I knew that she had been on the other side, taking care of my baby and helping me get him here. It was a beautiful and sacred moment, and I just miss her. I had wanted different results with this birth than I had gotten in the past. I knew I had to change everything about my prenatal care in order to get that result. I hired midwives instead of an OBGYN. I also hired a doula and did a lot of preparation and reading before birth. If you want different results, but you keep doing the same thing, that is insanity. You have to do things differently. How grateful I am that I did things different this time, and that God let me have a lot of the things on my list work out this time. God is good. Life is good. You can do hard things. Babies are miracles, and pregnancy isn't so bad. Our little boy is perfect, and we are so in love. Mama, I just want this to encourage you, that you can work towards hoping for good things to come to pass. And you know what? Sometimes they do. Sometimes it might be 1 in 5, like mine was. But nonetheless, sometimes those good things happen. And in the end, you get a miracle. If you're struggling in pregnancy, I encourage you to go look up some pictures of babies. They are so precious and so special, and your body is growing one. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing. But most of all, thank you for implementing what you learn on this podcast into your life for a more positive pregnancy. Until next time. Thank you for being a part of the Positive in Pregnancy and Motherhood podcast, for listening, for sharing, and most of all, for applying these tools into your own life to improve your own happiness so that you can find your own better thoughts for a better you in a positive pregnancy, in losing that stubborn baby weight, and becoming the mom you desire to be through taking small steps in thought and action to reach your goals. If you are a mother who has an inner desire to enjoy motherhood and pregnancy better, but you are having difficulty figuring it out, I can help you. I can help you find the small, doable steps without drastic changes to your everyday mom life. Reach out, let's connect, and let's see you move forward. My name is Jocelyn, and I thank you for listening. Until next time.